I never thought a pile of snow would become the most documented piece of evidence in a homeowners association dispute. But here I was, photographing frozen precipitation like it was the crime scene of the century. My name is Isaac O., and I had moved to Riverside Meadows, a meticulously planned community in Aurora, Colorado, exactly 18 months ago. The neighborhood sat just outside Denver, where the Rocky Mountains provided a stunning backdrop and dumped enough snow each winter to make our local plow drivers work overtime. I had bought a modest 3-bedroom ranch house with my savings from years of working as a software developer, eager to finally own a piece of property I could call my own. The place had good bones, a detached garage, and a driveway that stretched about 40 feet from the street to my front door. That driveway would become ground zero for what I can only describe as the most absurd territorial dispute of my life. The trouble started in late January, when a particularly brutal cold snap hit Colorado and brought with it nearly 2 feet of snow over a 3-day period. I had always been conscientious about clearing my driveway and the sidewalk in front of my house. I owned a decent snow blower that made quick work of even the heaviest accumulation, and I took pride in keeping my area clean. The problem was my next-door neighbor, a woman named Brenda Carmichael, who served as the vice president of our homeowners association, and took her position with the kind of zealous authority usually reserved for military generals. Brenda was 53 years old, with short blonde hair that she kept in that specific style that seemed to defy both gravity and common sense, always asking to speak to managers in her spare time. She wore athleisure clothing exclusively, despite never actually exercising, and had a collection of oversized sunglasses that she wore even on cloudy days. Her house was a mirror image of mine, positioned directly to my left, and our driveways ran parallel to each other with maybe 10 feet of snow-covered grass separating them. She lived alone except for her small white Pomeranian named Princess, a yappy little creature that barked at everything from falling leaves to its own shadow. The first incident happened on a Tuesday morning. I had woken up early to clear my driveway before heading to my home office for a day of video conferences. The sun had barely risen, casting long purple shadows across the pristine white landscape. I fired up my snow blower and methodically worked my way down the driveway, pushing the machine in steady lines and directing the chute to throw snow onto my front lawn, well away from the street and definitely on my own property. I was about halfway done when I noticed Brenda standing on her front porch, arms crossed, watching me with an expression that could freeze antifreeze. I waved politely, trying to maintain the neighborly facade we had been pretending to uphold since I moved in. She did not wave back. Instead, she marched down her unshoveled driveway, her designer boots crunching through 6 inches of powder, until she stood at the property line between our houses. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I need to speak with you about your snow removal technique." I turned off the snow blower, which sputtered into silence. The sudden quiet felt ominous. "Good morning, Brenda. What seems to be the problem?" "The problem," she said, gesturing dramatically at my lawn, "is that you are piling snow in a manner that is not aesthetically consistent with neighborhood standards. As per HOA Regulation 7.3, subsection B, all snow removal must be conducted in a way that maintains visual harmony throughout the community." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. None came. "Brenda, I am putting snow on my own lawn. It melts. That is what snow does. The placement creates an uneven visual line when viewed from the street," she continued, pulling out her phone to show me what appeared to be a photograph of my house taken from various angles. I have documented multiple violations over the past 2 winters. This is your final warning before I issue a formal citation. A citation for snow placement. I could not keep the disbelief out of my voice. Are you serious right now? Her face pinched into an expression of righteous indignation. The HOA board takes these matters very seriously. We have standards to maintain. Property values depend on uniformity and compliance. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that arguing with HOA board members was like trying to teach physics to a brick wall. Noted, is there anything else? Yes, actually. She pointed at the section of sidewalk in front of my house. You need to ensure that snow is cleared within 12 hours of snowfall cessation. I will be monitoring. With that ominous promise, she turned and trudged back to her house, leaving me standing in the cold wondering what I had done in a past life to deserve this particular circle of suburban hell. 2 days later, another storm rolled through. This one was lighter, dropping maybe 4 inches of powder, but it came overnight and continued through the morning. I waited until the snow stopped falling around 10 in the morning, then bundled up and went out to clear my driveway again. I was determined to do everything by the book this time, throwing all the snow onto the center of my front lawn where it could not possibly be construed as violating any aesthetic guidelines. I had just finished the last pass when I heard the distinctive roar of another snow blower starting up. I looked over to see Brenda, finally addressing her own driveway. She was pushing an industrial-grade snow blower, the kind that cost 3 times what mine did and had enough power to clear a highway. I went back to my work, planning to head inside for some hot coffee, when I noticed something odd. The chute on her snow blower was angled directly toward my property. At first, I thought it was an accident, a simple matter of her not paying attention to where the chute was pointed. But as I watched, she made deliberate passes up and down her driveway, and each time, a thick stream of snow arced through the air and landed squarely on the section of driveway I had just cleared. She was doing it on purpose. "Hey!" I shouted over the noise of her machine. "Your chute is pointing the wrong way." She either could not hear me or was pretending not to. The snow kept coming, piling up on my freshly cleared concrete in deliberate, almost artistic formations. I stood there, stunned by the sheer pettiness of it all, watching as she methodically covered a third of my driveway with her discarded snow. When she finally finished and turned off her machine, I walked over to the property line. "Brenda, you just threw all your snow onto my driveway." She looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Did I? Oh my goodness, I had no idea. The chute must have been pointed in the wrong direction. How careless of me. It was pointed directly at my property for your entire driveway. That was not an accident." "Well, I certainly did not mean to," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "But now that it is there, you should probably clear it before it becomes a safety hazard." HOA Regulation 4.1 states that all driveways must be maintained in a safe condition free of snow and ice accumulation. I felt my jaw clench. "You just put it there." "Did I? I do not recall that. But regardless, it is on your property now, so it is your responsibility." She smiled, the kind of smile a cat gives a mouse before the final pounce. "I would hate to have to write you up for a safety violation. Those come with fines, you know." She walked back to her house before I could respond, Princess the Pomeranian yapping excitedly at her heels. I stood there in the cold, looking at the pile of snow she had deliberately dumped on my driveway, and realized that this was not going to be a one-time thing. This was war, suburban HOA style. I cleared the snow again, taking photographs this time to document what she had done. I sent an email to the HOA board president. a retired dentist named Marcus Wellington, who lived on the other side of the neighborhood. I explained the situation calmly and professionally, attaching the photos and asking for clarification on whether it was acceptable for board members to dump snow onto other residents' properties. His response came 2 days later. "Thank you for your concern. Vice President Carmichael has assured the board that any snow displacement was accidental. Please continue to maintain your property in accordance with all HOA guidelines. Best regards, Marcus Wellington, HOA Board President." Of course, Brenda had gotten to him first. I was not surprised, just disappointed. The HOA board in Riverside Meadows operated like a small-town political machine, with Brenda pulling most of the strings despite not being the official president. Marcus was a figurehead who mostly cared about getting back to his golf game and did not want to deal with actual disputes. The following week brought another storm, and the pattern repeated itself. I would clear my driveway, Brenda would wait until I was done, and then she would clear hers while deliberately angling her snow blower to dump everything onto my property. Each time, she would claim it was an accident, and each time, I would document it and file complaints that went nowhere. By mid-February, I had a folder on my computer labeled Snow Wars that contained over 50 photographs, a dozen emails, and detailed notes about each incident. My girlfriend, Amanda H., thought I was losing my mind. "It is just snow," she said one evening as we sat in my living room, watching the latest storm roll in through the large front windows. "It melts. Why are you letting her get to you like this?" Amanda was a paralegal at a firm downtown, sharp and pragmatic, with long dark hair and a no-nonsense attitude toward life's problems. We had been dating for about 8 months, and she had been patient with my increasingly obsessive documentation of Brenda's snow terrorism. "It is not about the snow," I explained for what felt like the 100th time. "It is about the principle. She is abusing her position on the HOA board to harass me because I called her out on her petty rule enforcement. So what are you going to do? Sue her over snow placement? Take her to HOA court?" I did not have a good answer. The truth was, I felt trapped. Brenda had the backing of the HOA board, at least tacitly, and fighting her through official channels had proven completely pointless. I could not move without taking a significant financial loss, and I genuinely loved my house despite the nightmare neighbor. So I did what felt like the only option. I kept documenting everything and hoped that eventually something would change. The change came, though not in any way I could have predicted. It was a Saturday morning in late February when Colorado got hit with what the Weather Service called a historic snowstorm. Temperatures had been below freezing for nearly 2 weeks straight, creating a base layer of ice on everything. Then the storm came through, dumping 18 inches of heavy, wet snow on top of that ice layer. The combination was treacherous. The city issued warnings telling people to stay off the roads unless absolutely necessary, and even the most experienced winter drivers were sliding around like hockey pucks. I waited until late morning to start clearing my driveway, giving the snow time to stop falling and the sun a chance to do some of the work for me. The temperature had climbed to a balmy 28 degrees, which in Colorado winter terms practically counted as a heat wave. I bundled up in my heavy winter coat, pulled on insulated gloves, and fired up my snow blower. The work was harder than usual. The wet snow was heavy, and the machine struggled to throw it any significant distance. I had to make multiple passes over the same sections, and even then, I was mostly just pushing the snow around rather than fully clearing it. After about an hour, I had managed to create a mostly navigable path down my driveway, with large banks of snow piled on either side. I was catching my breath, leaning on the snow blower and considering whether I had the energy to tackle the sidewalk, when I heard Brenda's front door open. I looked over to see her emerging from her house, already dressed in her expensive winter gear and pulling out her industrial snow blower. Princess the Pomeranian followed her out, wearing a ridiculous pink sweater that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. I knew what was coming. I pulled out my phone and started recording a video, holding it at chest level to capture everything. Sure enough, Brenda started her machine and began clearing her driveway with the chute pointed directly at my property. The snow came flying over the property line, landing with wet splats on my freshly cleared driveway. "Really, Brenda?" I called out, making sure my voice was clear on the recording. "You are doing this again." She looked over at me, her expression utterly unconcerned. "I am simply clearing my driveway as required by HOA regulations. Where the snow lands is not my concern." "You are deliberately pointing the chute at my property. This is harassment." "Harassment?" She actually laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You think snow is harassment? You are being overly dramatic as usual. Perhaps if you spent less time complaining and more time maintaining your property, we would not have these issues." I kept recording as she made pass after pass, each time sending more snow onto my driveway. But this time, something was different. The snow she was blowing over was wetter and heavier than usual, and it was not just landing on my driveway. Some of it was falling short, creating a thick, slushy mess along the property line between our driveways. The combination of the ice underneath and the wet snow on top was creating a slick, dangerous surface. When Brenda finally finished her driveway, she turned off the machine and looked over at the mess she had created with evident satisfaction. "Looks like you have some work to do," she called over. "Better get to it before it freezes solid." She went inside, leaving Princess tied to a post on her front porch with a long leash. The little dog immediately started barking, a high-pitched, incessant sound that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. I was tempted to ignore the snow entirely, to just leave it there as evidence of her petty vindictiveness. But I knew that would only give her ammunition to file some kind of violation against me. So I started up my snow blower again and began the tedious process of re-clearing my driveway. I was about halfway done when Brenda came back outside, this time dressed in designer athleisure wear and carrying a leather leash. She was going to walk Princess, apparently having decided that the post-storm morning was the perfect time for a stroll. I watched from the corner of my eye as she untied the dog from the porch and started down her driveway, heading toward the sidewalk. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Brenda was looking at her phone, scrolling through something with one hand while Princess pulled at the leash with surprising strength for such a small dog. She was not paying attention to where she was stepping. She reached the end of her driveway, where that slick, slushy mess she had created was thickest, and her designer boot hit the ice hidden beneath the snow. Her feet went out from under her instantly. She let out a sharp yelp of surprise as she fell, her arms windmilling as she tried to catch her balance. It did not work. She came down hard on her right side, and I heard a distinct crack that carried clearly through the cold air. Princess started barking frantically, running in circles and tangling the leash around Brenda's legs. I turned off my snow blower and ran over, my earlier anger forgotten in the face of what was clearly a serious injury. "Brenda, are you okay?" She was lying on the ground, her face pale and twisted in pain. Her right wrist was bent at an unnatural angle and she was cradling it against her chest. "My wrist," she gasped. "I think it is broken. Do not move. I am calling an ambulance." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, giving the dispatcher my address and explaining the situation. They told me an ambulance was on the way but warned it might take longer than usual due to the road conditions. I knelt down next to Brenda, careful not to jostle her. Princess was still barking, and I gently picked up the little dog and held it, trying to calm it down. "Help is coming," I told Brenda. "Just stay still." She looked up at me, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw something other than hostility or smugness in her expression. She looked scared and in genuine pain. "It hurts so much," she said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I know. Try to breathe slowly. The ambulance will be here soon." I looked at the spot where she had fallen, the slick patch of ice and slush that she had created with her own snow blower. The irony was not lost on me, but this was not the time to point it out. The ambulance arrived about 15 minutes later, which was actually impressive given the road conditions. 2 paramedics came up the driveway with a stretcher and medical bags. They quickly assessed Brenda's injury, confirmed that her wrist was almost certainly broken, and carefully splinted it before helping her onto the stretcher. She was crying openly now, the pain and shock overwhelming her usual imperious demeanor. "Is there anyone we should call?" one of the paramedics asked. "Family member. Emergency contact." Brenda gave them her sister's number, someone named Patricia who lived in Denver. They promised to call her from the hospital. As they wheeled Brenda toward the ambulance, she looked back at me, Princess still in my arms. "Can you watch my dog?" she asked, her voice small and defeated. "Just until Patricia can come get her." "Of course," I said, surprised by the request. "Do not worry about Princess. Just focus on getting your wrist taken care of." They loaded her into the ambulance, and I stood in my driveway watching it pull away, its lights flashing red and blue against the white snow. Princess whimpered in my arms, and I looked down at the little dog, who suddenly seemed less annoying and more just scared and confused. Amanda came over later that afternoon. I had texted her about what happened, and she brought over some dog food she had picked up from a pet store, since I had no idea what Princess ate. We set up a temporary space for the dog in my laundry room, with food, water, and some old towels as a makeshift bed. "So let me get this straight," Amanda said as we sat at my kitchen table, mugs of hot chocolate warming our hands. "She spent weeks deliberately throwing snow onto your property, and then she slipped on that same snow and broke her wrist." "Pretty much," I confirmed. "The universe has a sense of irony. What are you going to do?" "What do you mean?" "I am going to take care of her dog until her sister picks it up, and then I guess I will just wait and see what happens next." Amanda gave me a look. "Isaac, you have weeks of documented evidence of her harassing you. She created the dangerous condition that injured her through her own deliberate actions. This is not just karma. This is actual, actionable liability." I had not really thought about it that way. "You think I should do something, sue her or something?" "No," Amanda said slowly, her paralegal mind clearly working through possibilities. "But I think you should protect yourself. Because when Brenda recovers from this, she is going to be angry and embarrassed, and people like her do not handle those emotions well. She is going to lash out, and you are going to be the target." She was right, of course. I spent the rest of the weekend organizing all my documentation, creating a detailed timeline of every incident, and backing everything up to the cloud. I also made copies of the video from that morning, the one that clearly showed Brenda deliberately throwing snow onto my property right before her fall. Brenda's sister, Patricia, came by on Sunday afternoon to pick up Princess. She was a harried-looking woman in her late 40s, with stress lines around her eyes and a phone that would not stop buzzing. "Thank you so much for watching her dog," Patricia said, looking genuinely grateful. "Brenda is going to be in the hospital for another day." They had to do surgery on her wrist. It was a bad break. I am sorry to hear that, I said, and I meant it. Whatever issues Brenda and I had, I would not wish a serious injury on anyone. Patricia hesitated, then lowered her voice. Look, I know my sister can be difficult. She has always been that way ever since we were kids. Getting divorced 3 years ago made it worse. This HOA board thing, it is like she has something to control, you know. It makes her feel important. I understand, I said, though I was not sure I really did. Just be patient with her, okay? This injury, it is going to make her even more difficult for a while. But she is still a person under all that. After Patricia left with Princess, I thought about what she had said. It was easy to turn Brenda into a cartoon villain, a one-dimensional HOA tyrant, but the reality was more complicated. She was a middle-aged woman who had gone through a painful divorce and was clearly trying to find purpose and control in whatever way she could. It did not excuse her behavior, but it added context. Monday morning, I woke up to find an email in my inbox from Marcus Wellington, the HOA board president. The subject line read, Emergency Board Meeting February 28th. The email was brief and formal. There had been an incident involving a board member, and an emergency meeting was being called to discuss liability and insurance matters. All homeowners were invited to attend, though it was not mandatory. The meeting would be held at the community clubhouse at 7 o'clock that evening. I forwarded the email to Amanda, who immediately called me. You need to go to that meeting, she said without preamble, and you need to bring all your documentation. Why? They are probably just discussing whether the HOA insurance covers Brenda's medical bills. Maybe, Amanda said. But they are also going to want to establish a narrative about what happened. If Brenda is telling them that you somehow caused her fall, or that the conditions on your property contributed to it, you need to be able to counter that immediately. The community clubhouse was a modest building at the center of Riverside Meadows, with a meeting room that could hold about 50 people and a small kitchen area. When I arrived at 6:55 that evening, there were already about 20 homeowners there, chatting in small groups and helping themselves to the coffee someone had set up. The mood was curious rather than tense. Most people did not know exactly what the meeting was about, just that it involved a board member and an accident. Marcus Wellington stood at the front of the room, looking uncomfortable in a suit that seemed a size too small for him. Next to him were the other 2 board members, Cheryl Benson, the secretary, and Donald Pierce, the treasurer. Cheryl was a pleasant woman in her 60s who mostly stayed out of HOA drama and focused on keeping accurate meeting notes. Donald was a stern accountant who cared primarily about keeping the HOA budget balanced and rarely spoke unless it involved money. At 7 o'clock sharp, Marcus called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he began, reading from notes on a piece of paper. "As some of you may have heard, there was an incident this past Saturday involving our vice president, Brenda Carmichael. She suffered a serious injury, a broken wrist, due to a slip and fall on icy conditions in our neighborhood." Murmurs ran through the crowd. Marcus continued, "The purpose of this meeting is to discuss the HOA's potential liability in this incident, and to remind all homeowners of their responsibility to maintain safe conditions on their properties, particularly during winter weather." I felt my stomach drop. They were going to try to blame me. Now, the incident occurred near the property line between Miss Carmichael's home and that of Isaac O. Marcus gestured vaguely in my direction, and suddenly every head in the room turned to look at me. "We want to be clear that no accusations are being made at this time. However, the board needs to understand exactly what happened so we can determine if there are any liability concerns for the HOA. I raised my hand. "May I speak?" Marcus looked like he wanted to say no, but with everyone watching, he nodded. "Of course." I stood up, pulling out my phone and the folder of documents I had brought. I have been documenting interactions with Miss Carmichael for the past 6 weeks, specifically regarding snow removal. I have photographs, videos, and emails that show a clear pattern of behavior. Miss Carmichael repeatedly and deliberately used her snow blower to deposit snow from her property onto mine, creating the exact conditions that led to her fall. The murmurs got louder. Marcus held up a hand. "Mr. O, I do not think that is relevant to the liability question." "With respect, it is completely relevant," I said. "Miss Carmichael's injury was the direct result of her own actions. She created the dangerous condition, and she suffered the consequences. The HOA has no liability here, and neither do I." "That is your interpretation," Marcus said, his voice taking on an edge. "But the board will need to conduct its own investigation. Then I would like to submit this evidence for that investigation." I held up my phone and the folder. I have videos from the morning of the incident showing Miss Carmichael deliberately angling her snow blower toward my property. I have dozens of photographs showing the same pattern over multiple weeks, and I have emails to the board documenting my complaints, which were ignored. Cheryl, the secretary, spoke up for the first time. "I think we should look at that evidence, Marcus." "I agree," said an older man in the back of the room whom I recognized as living 3 houses down from me. "We should get all the facts before we start talking about liability." Marcus looked cornered. "Fine, Mr. O. You can email that evidence to the board after the meeting. We will review it and include it in our investigation. Is there anything else?" Amanda had coached me on what to say next. "Yes. I want it noted in the official meeting minutes that I am formally requesting the board remain impartial in this investigation, and that I reserve all of my rights regarding any false claims or accusations that may arise from this incident." Donald, the treasurer, looked interested for the first time. "Are you planning to sue the HOA, Mr. O?" "I have no intention of suing anyone," I said carefully. "I just want to protect myself from unfair blame for an accident that was not my fault." The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with various homeowners asking questions and Marcus becoming increasingly flustered. By the end, it was clear that the room's sympathy was not going in the direction the board had hoped. People were not buying the narrative that a homeowner could be liable for someone else's injuries when that person had deliberately created the dangerous condition themselves. As people filed out, several neighbors came up to me, expressing support and sharing their own stories of Brenda's petty tyranny. Apparently, I was not the only one who had been on the receiving end of her overzealous rule enforcement. One woman told me Brenda had fined her $50 for having the wrong shade of mailbox. A man said Brenda had tried to force him to repaint his house because the trim color was allegedly not on the approved list, even though it had been that color when he bought the house. "Someone needed to stand up to her," the mailbox woman said quietly. "Maybe this is what it takes." Over the next 2 weeks, the neighborhood buzzed with gossip and speculation. Brenda had returned home from the hospital with her wrist in a cast and a sling, but she was not coming outside much. Patricia had been staying with her to help with daily tasks, and I saw her coming and going but never saw Brenda herself. The HOA board, meanwhile, was conducting its investigation, which apparently consisted of Marcus and Cheryl watching the videos I had sent and looking through my photographs. I received an email from Cheryl asking if I would be willing to meet with her to discuss the timeline of events. I agreed, and we met at the clubhouse on a Tuesday afternoon. Cheryl was kind but thorough. She went through every incident I had documented asking clarifying questions and taking detailed notes. When we finished, she sat back in her chair and sighed. "Mr. O, I am going to be honest with you. What you have shown me is deeply troubling. Brenda has been using her position on the board to harass you, and that is completely unacceptable. The board is supposed to enforce rules fairly, not use them as weapons against residents we personally dislike." "What happens now?" I asked. "I am going to present this to Marcus and Donald. I am also going to recommend that Brenda step down from the board, at least temporarily, while we review our policies and procedures. This should never have gotten this far." "Will that recommendation actually go anywhere?" Cheryl smiled sadly. "Between you and me, Marcus is tired of dealing with Brenda's drama. He only became president because no one else wanted to do it, and he just wants to keep the peace. Donald does not care about anything except the budget. If I can show them that keeping Brenda on the board is creating legal liability for the HOA, they will vote to remove her." True to her word, Cheryl presented her findings to the full board at their next regular meeting, which happened to be open to all homeowners. Amanda came with me this time, sitting in the back row and taking notes like the professional she was. The meeting was tense from the beginning. Marcus read through the standard agenda items quickly, clearly wanting to get through them before addressing the elephant in the room. When he finally reached the topic of Brenda's status on the board, you could feel the anticipation in the room. Cheryl presented her findings in a calm, professional manner. She walked through the timeline, showed excerpts from the videos and photographs, and pointed out the numerous emails I had sent that had been ignored. She concluded by stating that, in her opinion, Vice President Carmichael had violated the HOA's code of conduct for board members and had created liability for the organization through her actions. "Therefore," Cheryl said, "I move that we ask for Vice President Carmichael's resignation from the board, effective immediately." "I second the motion," Donald said immediately, clearly having been prepped beforehand. Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Should we not have Brenda here to defend herself before we vote on this? We invited her to attend," Cheryl said. "She declined. She was provided with a full copy of the evidence and given an opportunity to respond. She chose not to." The vote was called. Marcus, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else, voted yes. Donald voted yes without hesitation. Cheryl voted yes. The motion passed unanimously. "I will draft a formal letter to Miss Carmichael informing her of the board's decision," Cheryl said. "I will also recommend that we create a formal conflict resolution process to prevent situations like this from arising in the future." As the meeting adjourned, I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. I had won, in a sense. Brenda had been removed from her position of power, and I had been vindicated. But I also knew that this was not really over. Brenda and I still lived next door to each other, and a person like her would not take this kind of public humiliation lightly. I did not have to wait long to find out what form her retaliation would take. 3 days after the board meeting, I received a letter in the mail from a law firm in Denver. Brenda was suing me for negligence, claiming that I had failed to properly maintain my property, and that the dangerous conditions I had created led directly to her injury. She was seeking compensation for medical bills, pain and suffering, and lost wages from her part-time job as a real estate agent. The letter demanded $50,000. Amanda looked over the lawsuit papers in my living room that evening, her expression shifting from surprise to angry to something like grim determination. "This is absurd," she finally said. "She has no case. You have video evidence showing she created the condition that injured her. So what do? You get a lawyer. A real one, not just your paralegal girlfriend." She smiled slightly. but I can help you find a good one, someone who specializes in personal injury defense. Through Amanda's connections, I was referred to a lawyer named Elizabeth Chen, who had a small practice in Denver and specialized in exactly these kinds of cases. Elizabeth was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, and she laughed when she saw the video evidence I had compiled. "This is the most well-documented frivolous lawsuit I have seen in years," she said during our first meeting. "Your neighbor essentially filmed herself creating the dangerous condition and then injured herself on it. We are going to file a motion to dismiss immediately." "What are the chances it will be dismissed?" "Honestly, very good. But even if the judge does not dismiss it outright, we can make Brenda's life very difficult during discovery. She's going to have to explain under oath why she was deliberately throwing snow onto your property. She is going to have to explain why she ignored the obvious hazard she was creating. And she is going to have to explain why she thinks you are liable for injuries she caused to herself." The motion to dismiss was filed 2 weeks later. Brenda's lawyer, a personal injury attorney who probably took the case thinking it would be an easy settlement, filed a response opposing the motion. Elizabeth was not worried. "They are grasping at straws," she told me over the phone. "They are claiming you had a duty to warn Brenda about the dangerous condition, which is ridiculous since she created it. The judge is going to see right through this." The hearing on the motion to dismiss was scheduled for mid-April, which meant I had to live with the uncertainty hanging over me for several more weeks. During that time, Brenda and I existed in a state of Cold War. We did not speak, did not acknowledge each other's existence. If I was outside when she came out, one of us would immediately go back inside. The tension was exhausting. Amanda stayed over most nights during this period, providing moral support and helping me stay focused. "This is going to work out," she kept telling me. "You have the truth on your side, and you have the evidence. That matters." The hearing took place on a Wednesday morning at the Arapahoe County Courthouse in Centennial, just south of Aurora. Elizabeth had prepared me for what to expect, but I was still nervous as we sat in the courtroom waiting for our case to be called. Brenda was there with her attorney, sitting on the opposite side of the room. She still had her wrist in a brace, and she looked thinner and older than I remembered. When our case was called, both attorneys approached the bench and presented their arguments. Elizabeth was concise and compelling, walking the judge through the evidence and pointing out the absurdity of holding someone liable for injuries caused by the plaintiff's own deliberate actions. Brenda's attorney tried to argue that the law imposed a duty on property owners to warn of dangerous conditions, but even I could tell his heart was not in it. The judge, a middle-aged woman with glasses and an expression that suggested she had seen every possible permutation of human foolishness, listened to both sides, and then asked to see the video evidence. Elizabeth played it on a laptop, and I watched the judge's face as she saw Brenda deliberately angling the snow blower toward my property. "Counsel," the judge said when the video ended, "your client created this dangerous condition herself, correct?" Brenda's attorney shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, my client was simply clearing her own driveway. Where the snow landed was not something she controlled. The video clearly shows her adjusting the chute to aim at the plaintiff's property. That suggests control to me." The judge looked at her notes. "I am granting the motion to dismiss. The plaintiff cannot hold the defendant liable for injuries caused by the plaintiff's own actions. The case is dismissed with prejudice." I felt Amanda squeeze my hand. It was over. Brenda's lawyer tried to say something else, but the judge had already moved on to the next case. We filed out of the courtroom, and Elizabeth shook my hand in the hallway. "Congratulations," she said. "That went exactly as I expected." Brenda cannot refile the suit because it was dismissed with prejudice. You are completely in the clear. Thank you, I said, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders that I had not fully realized I was carrying. Now, if you want, we could discuss filing a countersuit for your legal fees and potentially harassment. You would have a decent case. I thought about it for a long moment. The vindictive part of me wanted to make Brenda pay, both literally and figuratively. But the exhausted part of me just wanted this to be over. No, I finally said. I just want to move on. Elizabeth nodded, seeming to understand. That is probably the healthier choice. Good luck, Mr. O. When Amanda and I got back to my house that afternoon, we found an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. The handwriting was shaky, probably because Brenda was still dealing with her wrist injury. The note read, "I am sorry. I know you probably do not believe that, and I do not blame you. I have been a terrible neighbor and a terrible person. The HOA position, the control, it was the only thing making me feel like I mattered after my divorce. I took it too far. I know that now. I am moving to Denver to live with my sister. The house is going on the market next week. I hope your next neighbor is better than I was. Brenda." I stood there holding the note, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. There was satisfaction that she had finally acknowledged what she had done. There was relief that she was leaving, but there was also a strange sadness for this woman who had been so miserable that she had made everyone around her miserable too. "Well," Amanda said, reading the note over my shoulder, "I guess that is as close to a happy ending as you are going to get." She was right. Brenda's house went on the market the following week, and it sold quickly to a young couple with a baby. They introduced themselves before they even moved in, seemed friendly and normal, and did not once mention HOA regulations. Patricia came by one afternoon while they were looking at the house to collect the last of Brenda's things. "How is she?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. "Better, actually," Patricia said. "Living in the city, being around people, not having that HOA thing to obsess over. She is seeing a therapist. It is helping. That is good. For what it is worth, she really is sorry. She knows she cannot undo what she did, but she is trying to be better." I nodded, not sure what to say to that. Patricia left, and I went back inside where Amanda was making coffee. The snow finally melted completely in late April, revealing the brown grass and the debris of winter. Spring came to Colorado the way it always does, in fits and starts, with warm days followed by surprise snowstorms followed by warm days again. I planted flowers in my front garden, something I had been too stressed to do the previous year. The new neighbors, Jake and Melissa, did the same, and we compared notes on which varieties did best in Colorado's temperamental climate. The HOA held its annual meeting in May to elect new board members. I attended, more out of curiosity than anything else. Marcus announced he was stepping down as president, having served his required term and wanting to get back to his retirement hobbies. Cheryl agreed to serve as president, and 2 new members were elected to fill the other positions. One of them was Jake, my new neighbor, who had a background in project management and wanted to help the HOA run more efficiently. "We are going to implement that conflict resolution process Cheryl mentioned," Jake told me after the meeting. "Make sure what happened with you and Brenda never happens again. Board members should not be able to use their position to harass residents." "That sounds good," I said, meaning it. Summer arrived, bringing with it the kind of perfect Colorado weather that makes you forget the brutal winters. Amanda and I spent weekends hiking in the mountains and evenings grilling in my backyard. The stress of the past months faded, becoming just another story to tell, though usually we did not tell it. It was not particularly fun to relive. In June, I got an email from an address I did not recognize. The subject line was from Brenda. I almost deleted it without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. The email was short. I know I do not have the right to contact you, and you can ignore this if you want. I just wanted you to know that I got a part-time job at a community center in Denver, helping with their programs for seniors. It is not much, but it is helping me focus on contributing instead of controlling. My therapist says that is progress. I hope you are well. I hope the new neighbors are treating you better than I did. I really am sorry for everything. Brenda. I showed the email to Amanda. Should I respond? She thought about it. Do you want to? I am not sure. Then do not. You do not owe her anything, Isaac. If responding feels like something you want to do for yourself, then do it. But do not do it because you feel obligated. I never did respond to that email, but I did not delete it either. It sat in my inbox, a small reminder that people were complicated, and that even the worst neighbors were still human beings dealing with their own struggles. August brought news that Brenda's old house had been completely renovated by Jake and Melissa. They had repainted, updated the landscaping, and generally made it look warm and welcoming instead of sterile and intimidating. I complimented them on the work one evening when we were both outside watering our respective lawns. Thanks, Melissa said, bouncing their baby daughter on her hip. We wanted to make it feel like home. The previous owner, the woman who lived here before, apparently did not do much to the place. No, she did not, I agreed, smiling slightly. Life in Riverside Meadows settled into a comfortable routine. The HOA under Cheryl's leadership was more reasonable and less authoritarian. Rules were still enforced, but with common sense and flexibility. When someone's mailbox got damaged in a hailstorm and they had to order a replacement that was not exactly the right shade, Cheryl gave them an extension instead of issuing a fine. When someone's lawn started looking patchy in the July heat, they got a friendly reminder instead of a threatening letter. The first significant snow of the next winter came in November, earlier than usual. I fired up my snow blower and cleared my driveway, directing all the snow onto my own lawn like I always had. Jake cleared his driveway at the same time, and we waved to each other as we worked. His snow blower chute pointed away from my property. It was such a small thing, but it felt significant. Amanda moved in officially in December. We had been talking about it for months, and it finally felt like the right time. She brought her furniture, her books, and her cat, a grumpy orange tabby named Marmalade who immediately claimed the sunniest spot in the living room as his own territory. "Are you sure about this?" I asked her as we unpacked boxes in what was now our bedroom. "Living in an HOA neighborhood, after everything that happened," she laughed. "Isaac, what happened with Brenda was not normal. That was not an HOA problem. That was a Brenda problem, and Brenda is gone." She was right, of course. The neighborhood itself was fine. The house was great. The neighbors, with the obvious exception of the one who no longer lived there, were perfectly pleasant. We were building a life together, and it was a good life. On Christmas Eve, we hosted a small party for some of the neighbors. Jake and Melissa came with their daughter. The couple from across the street came with a bottle of wine. Even Cheryl stopped by for a bit, bringing cookies she had baked herself. We stood around my living room, talking and laughing, and I realized that this was what community was supposed to feel like. Not rules and regulations and petty enforcement, but people coming together because they wanted to, because they enjoyed each other's company. As the party wound down and guests started heading home, bundled up against the cold Colorado night, Amanda and I stood on the front porch watching them go. Snow was starting to fall again, light flakes drifting down through the glow of the streetlights. "You know," Amanda said, leaning against me. "A year ago you were documenting snow placement and dealing with lawsuits. Look at you now." "Look at us now," I corrected. She smiled. "Yeah, look at us." The snow continued to fall, blanketing the neighborhood in fresh white, covering all the old scars and giving everything a clean start. Somewhere in Denver, Brenda was presumably doing the same thing in her own way, working on being better. I hope she succeeded. I did not forgive her exactly, but I did not hate her anymore either. She was just a person who had been struggling and had handled it badly, and maybe now she was handling it better. Jake's house, the one that used to be Brenda's, looked warm and inviting with its lights on and a wreath on the door. My own house looked the same, I realized. We had turned it into a home, Amanda and I, despite everything that had happened. Despite the HOA Karen who had pushed snow my way and then slipped on it and broke her wrist walking her dog, life had a way of working itself out, I thought. Not always fairly, and not always in the way you expected, but somehow it worked out. The snow would fall and it would melt. The seasons would change. Neighbors would come and go. But home would still be here, and that was enough. We went back inside, closing the door on the cold and the snow and the past. Marmalade was curled up on the couch, and the lights on our Christmas tree twinkled in the darkened living room. Amanda put on some music, something soft and jazzy, and we cleaned up from the party together, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of people who belong together. Later, after everything was put away and we were getting ready for bed, I checked my email one last time. There was a message from the HOA listserv, a reminder from Cheryl about trash pickup being delayed due to the holiday. There was a newsletter from my employer wishing everyone happy holidays. And there, at the bottom, was another email from Brenda's address. I almost did not open it. I had moved on, built something good, and I did not need to revisit that chapter of my life. But something made me click on it anyway. "I saw that you and Amanda are engaged," the email read. "I saw the announcement in the Riverside Meadows newsletter. Congratulations. I know this is strange to say, but I am genuinely happy for you. You deserve good things. You were a better person than I was through all of that mess. I am still working on myself, still going to therapy, still trying to figure out how to be the person I should have been all along. I started volunteering with a dispute resolution nonprofit, helping people solve conflicts without lawyers and courts. I think about our situation a lot. I use it as an example of what not to do. Anyway, I did not expect you to respond to this, but I wanted you to know that I am grateful in a weird way for what happened. It was the wake-up call I needed. I hope you and Amanda have a wonderful life together. I hope your holidays are warm and peaceful. Brenda. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the screen. Amanda came out of the bathroom, saw my expression, and sat down next to me. I showed her the email. "She saw the engagement announcement," Amanda said softly. "That is kind of sweet, actually, in a weird way. Should I respond this time?" Amanda thought about it. "Maybe, just something simple. You do not have to rebuild a friendship or anything. But if she is genuinely trying to be better, maybe acknowledging that is the right thing to do." I hit reply and typed, "Thank you for the kind words. I am glad you are doing better. I hope your volunteer work is rewarding. All the best, Isaac." I hit send before I could overthink it. It felt right, like closing a door that had been left slightly ajar. Whatever had happened between us, whatever anger and frustration and stress, it was truly over now. We had both moved on to better things. Amanda squeezed my hand. "Come to bed. It is late, and we have Christmas brunch with my parents tomorrow." I followed her, turning off lights as we went, leaving just the glow of the Christmas tree in the living room. Outside, the snow continued to fall, peaceful and steady, covering the world in white. And somewhere, 2 driveways over, my snow blower sat in my garage, ready for the next storm, its chute pointed firmly at my own property where it belonged. The story of the HOA Karen who kept pushing snow my way, then slipped on it and broke her wrist walking her dog, had finally reached its end. Not with a dramatic confrontation or a courtroom victory speech, but with a quiet email and a sense of peace. Sometimes that was how the best stories ended. Not with a bang, but with the soft sound of snow falling and the warmth of home waiting inside. That night, I dreamed about spring, about flowers blooming in the garden and warm sunshine and Amanda laughing at something I said. When I woke up on Christmas morning, the snow had stopped and the sun was shining, turning the whole neighborhood into something bright and clean and new. I looked out the bedroom window at Jake's house, at the street beyond, at the mountains in the distance, and I felt grateful. Grateful for the struggle that had made me stronger, grateful for the resolution that had brought peace, and grateful for the life I was building with Amanda in this imperfect but ultimately good place called home. The HOA newsletter that month included a new section called Neighbor Spotlight, where Cheryl interviewed different residents about their lives and interests. She had asked if Amanda and I wanted to be featured, given our recent engagement, but we had politely declined. We did not need the spotlight. We just needed each other and this quiet, normal life we were creating together. But the newsletter also included something else. A new HOA policy about snow removal. It was simple and straightforward. Residents were required to clear their driveways and sidewalks within a reasonable time frame after snowfall. Snow should be placed on the resident's own property when possible. If snow needed to cross property lines, permission from the neighboring property owner should be obtained first. Any disputes regarding snow placement should be brought to the HOA board for mediation before escalating to legal action. It was common sense, really. The kind of policy that should have existed all along but had not been necessary until someone made it necessary. I like to think that even if my conflict with Brenda had been miserable at the time, at least something good had come from it. Future residents of Riverside Meadows would not have to deal with the same situation. The rules were clearer. The process was fairer. The community was better. That was worth something, I thought. Maybe even worth everything we had gone through to get here. As January turned into February and then March, the snow began to melt in earnest. The piles on my lawn that had seemed like they would last forever slowly shrank and then disappeared, leaving behind soggy grass and the occasional forgotten dog toy from the previous summer. The days grew longer, the temperatures climbed, and life continued its steady forward march. Amanda and I set a date for the wedding, October, when the aspens in the mountains would be turning gold and the weather would be perfect. Not too hot, not too cold, just right for an outdoor ceremony at a venue we had found in the foothills. We sent out save the dates and started the long process of planning that all engaged couples go through, the mixture of excitement and stress that comes with organizing a major life event. I did not invite Brenda to the wedding. That would have been too strange, too much of a bridge that neither of us needed to rebuild. But I did think about her sometimes, wondering how she was doing, hoping that her therapy and volunteer work were helping her find peace. People were capable of change, I had learned. Sometimes that change came from hitting rock bottom. Sometimes it came from slipping on ice and breaking a wrist and losing everything you thought made you important. However it came, change was possible, and that was a hopeful thing. The last time I saw any trace of Brenda was in April, when I was at a coffee shop in Denver meeting a friend from work. I saw a flyer on the community bulletin board advertising a conflict resolution workshop being offered by a local nonprofit. At the bottom, in small print, was a list of volunteer facilitators. Brenda Carmichael was one of the names. I took a picture of the flyer, not entirely sure why. Maybe as a reminder that people could surprise you. Maybe as evidence that the story really was over. Maybe just because it felt like a strange, full-circle moment that deserved to be documented, the way I had documented everything else. When I showed the picture to Amanda later, she smiled. "Good for her," she said simply. And that was that. Summer came again, my second in Riverside Meadows, and it was infinitely better than the first. No lawsuits hanging over my head. No hostile neighbor next door. Just long evenings on the patio with Amanda, weekends exploring Colorado's hiking trails, and the simple pleasure of living in a place that finally felt like home. Jake and Melissa became good friends. Their daughter took her first steps in our backyard during a 4th of July barbecue, and we all cheered like it was the most important moment in the world. Cheryl stepped down as HOA president after one term, having accomplished what she set out to do, and a new board took over with the same sensible, low-drama approach to governance. The neighborhood thrived. People took care of their houses because they wanted to, not because they were being threatened with fines. Lawns stayed green. Mailboxes stayed upright. And when the first snow of the third winter fell in November, everyone cleared their driveways without incident, without drama, without anyone pushing snow onto anyone else's property. It was boring in the best possible way. Amanda and I got married in October as planned, surrounded by friends and family, and the golden aspens of the Colorado foothills. It was a perfect day, the kind you remember in snapshots. Amanda walking down the aisle in a dress that made her look like something out of a dream, my hands shaking as I slipped the ring onto her finger. The way the sunset painted everything orange and pink during the reception, dancing under string lights while our favorite songs played. There was no drama, no last-minute disasters, no unwelcome guests or family feuds. Just two people who loved each other making a promise to keep loving each other, surrounded by people who supported that promise. And if, in a quiet moment during the reception, I thought briefly about the chain of events that had led to this moment, about the HOA Karen and the snow and the lawsuit and the stress, well, that was okay. Those things had happened and they had shaped me, but they did not define me. They were just part of the story. The difficult middle chapter that made the happy ending possible. When we returned from our honeymoon in Hawaii, tanned and relaxed and ready to start our married life, we came home to Riverside Meadows to find that our neighbors had decorated our front porch with a "Welcome Home" banner and stocked our fridge with groceries. It was the kind of thoughtful gesture that reminded you why community mattered. Why putting down roots in a place was worth the occasional difficulty. Life settled into a new rhythm, the rhythm of marriage and shared routines and building a future together. We talked about maybe getting a dog. We talked about maybe starting a family in a few years. We talked about all the possibilities that stretched out before us, exciting and terrifying and wonderful. And when winter came again and the snow fell and I went out to clear the driveway, I did so with a sense of peace. The snow blower worked perfectly. The chute pointed at my own lawn. Jake waved from his driveway, clearing his own snow with the same conscientiousness. Everything was as it should be. The past was behind us. The HOA Karen who had pushed snow my way was living her own life in Denver, hopefully finding the peace and purpose she had been missing. And I was here, in this house, with this woman I loved, in this community that had weathered a storm and come out stronger. It was more than I had expected when I first bought the house. It was more than I had hoped for during those dark months of conflict and stress. But it was exactly what I needed, exactly what I had fought for without fully realizing it at the time. Home was not just a place. It was not just four walls and a roof and a driveway to shovel. Home was the people you chose to surround yourself with, the community you built, the life you created despite the obstacles. Home was what you made it, and this, finally, was home.